and welcome to the T-33 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. Where are we at the moment? Well, we're located in Victorville, which is in the southern part of California. As you can see, it's an aircraft graveyard, and that's where we're going to be flying our T-33 from today. First of all, we're going to talk about the history of the T-33, then we're going to do a walk around showing off the outside details, then we're going to look at the inside details, some of the extra features that are integrated with this aircraft, and then we're going to do a short test flight showing off some of the quirks and some of the handling, some of the amazing things the T-33 can do, and then we're going to come back, land, and review it all at the end. So let's get straight into the history of the T-33. Now, where do I even start with the history of the T-33? Well, we actually have to start with a slightly different aircraft, and I'll explain why. Now, the T-33 is a trainer, hence the name, T for trainer. It is based heavily, and when I mean heavily, it's effectively the same plane as the P-80, but with a slightly lengthened fuselage and two stations in there so that you can be sat in the back and have an instructor with you as well. So we're going to talk about some of the history of the P-80, but it's applicable to both because it's effectively a version of that plane. Now, the aircraft was designed by legendary designer Kelly Johnson. You may have heard his name before. Some of his highlight reels, let's just go through a few. U-2, SR-71, I think I rest my case there. If you can think of a cool aircraft from the 40s, 50s or 60s, he's probably designed it. Now, his team designed the aircraft from idea in the head to aircraft in the air in 143 days. It's got to be a record of some kind. It's absolutely amazing they're able to do that in the period. The P-80 was the first jet fighter to enter the service in the United States Army Air Force and was powered by an Allison J33 engine, same as the T-33, which has 5,400 pounds of thrust when it's got the water injection system on, and a little bit less without that. One of the unique things about it is it's got a maximum speed of 505 knots, which is unheard of in the 40s at sea level, and it's a straight wing, so there's no swept wing, and it's believed to be the fastest straight wing aircraft in the world. Now, I heard that from Gregory, who flies for Ace Mega Aviation and was our consultant with this, and he actually flies the T-33 at air shows. So if a man would know, he would know. Now, the first flight of the T-33 itself was the 22nd of March 1948. So this is an old aircraft. This is a 40s aircraft, but it looks like something that could have come from the 60s, to be honest. As we've talked about, it's not really a trainer. It is a fighter that's been made into a trainer. Now, that's what made it so unique and so good at its job, because what was happening in this period of the 50s, 60s, and even into the 70s with training, you had people going from these really low performance in terms of overall speed and altitude piston planes who now have got to be trained to fly the quickest, most complicated, hardest jets in the world to fly, the Century Series fighters, F-100, F-104, etc. They needed a trainer to be able to do that, and that was the T-33. It was actually retired from the Bolivian Air Force in 2017 after 44 years of service, and the aircraft was produced from 1948 to 1959 with about 6,500 of them built. And there are some still today in private hands, such as Gregory as well, including Boeing actually had 2 of them and used them as a chase aircraft for the 787's first flight. But they did retire them not too long ago, it was only a few years ago, 2020 I believe it was, with 66 years of service for them. Now, that was a quick overview of the history of the T-33, so next we're going to jump into the simulator, take a look at the aircraft, and take a look at some of the cool features that we've put in the sim. Okay, let's take a look at some of these details that we've put in the sim. And we're going to start with a quick little walk around here. As you can see, we've got all the covers on the aircraft. So we've got the rain cover, the pitot, the inlet, and we've also got the pins in the gear. And we're going to start here at the nose. Now, I know you've probably heard me say this before, but it never ceases to amaze me how close you can get with these aircraft now. Look at the details. Look, you can see all the screw heads. You can even see the sort of fabric texturing on the inlet there. Now, obviously, these are the main inlet for the engine. This is a single engine aircraft, And we said we were going to come back to talking about the Allison engine. There's something that you might notice. The aircraft is kind of, fat is a bit rude, but a bit wide at the rear. Now, why is this? Well, actually, these early jet engines were based around a British design of jet engine, the early Whittle jet, where you had the combustion chambers in little tubes that go all around the middle of the engine, and that makes them pretty big, basically. Now, the German engines in the 40s didn't have this. They kind of looked more like your conventional straight-through jet engine, but these ones were normally pretty wide, and that's why the fuselage is kind of that wide size and then comes down. Definitely not an ugly aircraft. For that, it actually makes it look a bit more stout and strong. I really, really like the look of this aircraft. Now, let's take a look at the nose wheel here. Also, as you can see, with the Acemaker 3, fantastic artwork here. This is flown by Gregory, as shown in our trailer interview with him, but we've managed to replicate that in the sim. I just think it's brilliant artwork. Look, and you can get super close up to it, and you can see it in all of its detail. You can even see, look, the reflection in there, and you can see everything that you just like you're basically standing next to the aircraft. Coming down here on the nose, we've got single nose wheel, which is just pivoting from the one side, and we've got the taxi lights, landing lights there. But let's just take a look at some of this detail on the tyre as well. Looks great. I don't even know. I've got nothing to add. Just take a look at it, basically. As I mentioned, we've got the rain cover on, which we can remove. We're going to leave it on for now, just because we're imagining the aircraft just been a bit of a storage for a while before the season. Moving along here, we've got the air intake from the other side feeding into the engine at the rear. And we've got the main gear and the gear bay. Now, we've got some other little decals and things that were copied off the aircraft, the Acemaker 3. And you can even see we've got a little one here on the inside of the gear bay. Looking really cool, little roundel there. Gear bay's not too big, of course. Gear itself is not too large. It's not the heaviest aircraft in the world, around 14,000 pounds, something like that. But you know, for a fighter of its period, was pretty good going. Moving along, leading edge. We don't have any slats. It's just flaps at the rear aircraft, but it's got a straight wing, so. Not to get too in-depth about swept wings versus straight wings, but straight wing aircraft are less prone, let's put it that way, to sort of poor behaviour. We'll leave it at that. Now, this is probably one of the most iconic things on the T-33 and the P-80 are these enormous tip tanks. Now, these tip tanks are not just for fashion, let's put it that way, not just to make it look like something that's definitely from the 50s/60s, even though it's from the 40s, but it gives that vibe. These actually reduce some form of drag. You might be looking at me going, I'm sorry, what? Well, they obviously add drag because they're very large, but what we see today on airliners where you have, sharklets or wingtip fences, these are sort of doing a similar thing where they're reducing a form of drag that the wing makes, induced drag, by blocking the airflow going up and down. We won't get too far into it, but actually they're not all bad when it comes to aerodynamics, let's put it that way. And you can see we've got some stabilizing fins at the rear here. Again, can get super close to all of this and it looks fantastic. You can even see there the capacities of these tanks and all the way around the edge. And then we've got the navigation lights there. Moving back to the flaps, fairly conventional, straightforward flaps, just drop down. Control from the cockpit, which have little notches that go in a percent. That's how we've done it, so you can see it easily. Again, this is sort of where the engine would be located, well, is located in this sort of section here, because the air's getting in there, and we have some more outlets/inlets at the top there. Now, tail of the aircraft. Now, this is the only part of the aircraft. Now, let me just sneakily move the camera. Now, if I showed you that and you didn't know it was a jet, I would say that looks quite old. It looks like sort of Mustang, B-17. You can tell that's a 40s plane as such, and it's one of the only parts that I think carries that sort of heritage, because the rest of it just looks like it's from the future, it really, really does. But it's something that I find a bit interesting. Of course, it was because they used the designs that they know at the time, and remember, this plane was done in 143 days, so they didn't have all the time in the world to reinvent the wheel. There's nothing wrong with it. It works absolutely perfectly fine. Again, looking at some of these details we've got here with the rear removed before. This is the exhaust. So we have the straight through jet leading back here, and this is where all the thrust is going to come out, because this is not a bypass engine. This side of the aircraft, fairly similar to the other. Obviously it's just a mirror, there's nothing asymmetrical with it. Again, flaps on this side leading to the tip tanks and all the way round to the front, where we are back where we started. Now if I just zoom the aircraft out a little bit, we can start to see how we can modify some of the things that we have on the exterior of the aircraft. Alright, so we've just hopped on the inside of the aircraft. You can actually see we've got still the rain cover on, which is pretty cool to see when you're in here. Now, if you want to show the EFB, which is actually a phone this size, but we're still going to call it the electronic flight bag, there's a little hidden screw down here, and bingo, it will show all of the options here. Now, some of these things that we can show are we can have missiles and bombs. Now, remember, on the marketplace version, that will not be available. So that will only be available if you do not purchase this aircraft through the marketplace. We can have the flare dispensers on, aerobatic string, luggage pod, yes and no. Now, adds a pod at the back for clues in the name, adding some more luggage. And we've got some engine covers. We're going to remove those now. Remove the rain covers. And then we're going to remove the pins as well, so no. And if you want to, you can just remove them all by clicking the remove all, and it will get everything off. And we're not going to have any payload today. That's going to come to this a little bit later when we do the interior overview, but that's how you toggle all the different exterior things on the aircraft. Okay, here we are in the rear of the aircraft now, and we're going to take an overview of the cockpit. Now, I just wanted to show you this because it's kind of cool to see both forward and back, but we're going to transition into the front of the aircraft, going where you wouldn't be able to walk in the rear one, cross the sort of central bulkhead here, or divider, and we go past the ejector seat to where your head would be if you were flying the aircraft. Now, let's just start and basically let's go over the different instruments that we have and some of the cool options that we have available as well. We already talked about this is how you toggle on the EFB, so it's on the left here, and there are some other options that we didn't cover. So effectively we have some radio frequencies, which shows you where we are and the close by, so you can put them in. We've got the map as well, and you can see here we are at Victorville, home button, and then the ground option we've already gone through. So a little bit there, nice little easy way to interact with it. And of course, like I say, you can get rid of it, but look, it's actually got a nice little suction thing on the window. If you want to leave it there, you can do just that. Now I'm going to pan back a little bit before I show you the next one here. You can see we have the classic style cockpit. So this is sort of how people would fly the aircraft in period as a trainer. Now you might not want to do that because, well, a lot of gauges, things like that, and a lot of them have been retrofitted to use modern avionics, including the AceMaker 3. There's a lot of different modern avionics. So if we go up to this little hidden screw here, bingo, we have a brand new flight deck put in here. Now, same in the rear, you have in the front, and we actually have all this integrated super nice. So we've got some Garmin units here, another one down here. We also have a Garmin style Autopilot, which is much easier to interact with than the original one. And we've also even got a standby instrument here now. And you can also see quite a lot of the gauges are being compressed because you don't need as many analog gauges anymore. And that gives you the sort of this, well, a cleaner cockpit, to be honest, than the original. And also easier to interact with, generally makes it more of a pleasure to fly around, especially on sort of nav flights. But if you don't want that, of course, you can go back to the classic. Personally, I kind of like the classic cockpit. I mean, I love the functionality of the new one, but the classic cockpit just has this sort of, I don't know, vibe to it that makes me think like, yeah, I'm there. I'm in the 40s. I'm about to start my training to go on F-104. So we're going to stick with that for the overview and look at some of the sort of differences after we turn the aircraft on. So let's actually give some power to the aircraft so we can see some of these gauges and systems and things like this. So if we come down here, we can see we've got the battery, and we're going to put that on. Now you can see the aircraft starts to get a little bit come to life, and we can hear a little bit of the background sounds. These are all recorded from the real aircrafters course, as we have that connection with AceMaker Aviation, who's helped us out throughout the whole process. Now, we're not going to go over every single system because I can talk and we'll be here for hours, let's put it that way, but just a quick overview. You can sort of see these buttons here. These are push to test, so if you get a highlight red back, then you know it's working well. Standard instrumentations as such, you sort of you've got your loc, range, things like this. your magnetic indicator, so radial magnetic indicator, compass, but it's not quite as you'd imagine because it's kind of fixed and points. So all the instruments are, I mean, you can get used to them pretty easily, but they're not quite as you imagine. They're easy to see when you're in flight. Now, this is obviously, we need to pull to cage this, so we can either cage it if we're doing heavy aerobatics, we don't want it to tumble up and down because these are gyros, and we can actually adjust our sort of attitude indication there. This is the N1 gauge, so let's move up, or it's listed here as RPM, but still it's N1, up to a maximum of 100, but the gauge goes to 110 because you can actually overshoot the engine, which is not very good, and it would need to be inspected if you did that. You've got DME, speed, which is in knots. Now be aware of that, it's in knots. Quite a lot of manuals make reference to miles per hour because there was a trend, well, is it a trend? I guess it was a trend in the 40s, 50s to list things in miles an hour to make things more sort of accessible for people flying aircraft, because knots is a little bit of a strange measurement, but this is in knots. Altimeter, slip indicator, climb indicator, and the exhaust gas temperature with the different limitations on there. Flaps, as I said before, you can see 20, 40, 60, 80, and then all the way down, so you can kind of see the percentages they go through. The clock, and you've got some load indicator here, the oil pressure, fuel pressure, the hydraulic pressure, because this aircraft is hydraulically boosted on the flight controls, which is very nice. Considering at 500 knots you would need, I think it's around 60 kilos of force to actually move the ailerons if even at maybe slightly lower speeds, 400 knots, so they are hydraulically boosted. This is for the oxygen and starting, and we have the emergency fuel selector here, and flare release, remember, we actually have to turn that option on in the EFB, and we'll come to it later, but let's go up here. This is where you release some of the different coloured smokes from there. That's what they're utilised for. Moving down on the right hand side, we have a lot of, I guess you could call it the electrical panel, generator, pitot heat, some navigation lights, things like this. And this is how we open the canopy. Now, to open the canopy, reasonably straightforward to be perfectly honest. You just unlock the canopy and you would click open. And then once it's open, you will just click this and pull it to full close or part close, whichever you want, and then lock it again. That's how you do it. So pretty straightforward, and it hinges up and back, so it's not a sideways, it's kind of an actuated up and back, but you do need a power for that because it's not manually done. TACAN VRILS, so sort of navigation instruments back here as well, and then also along here we have the radio instrumentation. So this is how you set the radio, so it's kind of like, actually if you watch the Scout video, it's kind of like that dialer wheel, like an old telephone, where it's like one, then something on the other ring, something on the other ring, and this is how you set the transponder, and this is where you set the mode, and down here is the nav frequencies for the similar thing. On the left hand side is where we're starting to get into the business side of actually flying the aircraft. We've got the throttle, and we have the dive brake actuator on the top there, which is speed brake basically, but of course these things are going to be diving quite a lot. And this is the aileron booster, not modelled, but it's always on because we always want to be able to sort of fly the aircraft with that, not having that 60 kilos of force. Landing lights and some cabin pressure things are located back here. Now, we're going to spend a little bit more time talking about the fuel system. Something that we were told almost straight away by Gregory was, this is one of the, I'm not going to say bad design, because it's not a bad design, but it's something that you've got to be aware of, because it will kill you quickly, very, very quickly.
Is, you know, you have 6 fuel tanks. There's 3 on each. You have the tip tanks, the leading edges, the wings on both sides, and then they both feed the fuselage tank, which feeds the engine. And you can't burn them all at the same time and turn them off as they empty out, because the engine can only burn so much gas, and the fuselage tank can only hold so much gas. So whatever that doesn't burn or hold gets pumped overboard, and you have no way of knowing until you're down to your last 700 pounds of gas.
It'll all be explained in the manual, but summary of it is, it's very easy to flame this aircraft out with plenty of fuel inside the aircraft. So it's all generally from Spain, generally feeding into the fuselage tank, but you have to manually do it. So you have to manually transfer that fuel into the fuselage. So if we just leave it in this current position now with the fuselage on, it's going to burn all the fuel in the fuselage tank and it's going to flame the engine out. effectively. So you're going to have to manually go, oh wait, I need to transfer from the tip tank, oh wait, I need to transfer from the leading edge tanks, oh wait, I need to transfer from the wing tanks into the fuselage tank to be able to do it. Now if you just do what I did at one point and panic and go, you can do this, and it turns them all on, which is going to give you some fuel back, but the issue you have there is if the fuselage tank is full, it's actually just going to vent it overboard and dump the fuel, so you're going to lose the fuel. So then you may end up going from, I've actually got loads of fuel, I've dumped it all, and I haven't got enough to get back to base. So pay attention to the fuel system. It's one of the things you really need to pay attention to. This is that water injection, so it injects water into the engine to cool it down effectively. This is quite common from aircraft of this period. Even early 747s had that. It gives you more thrust, basically, without damaging the core of the engine. Yeah, that's about it from there. And that is effectively a very quick overview. Now, in the rear, you've got a replication of these instruments, but not quite as many, because it's obviously where the trainer, or the trainee, I should say, would be actuating things. I'm just going to let this modern avionics boot up so you can see that we have the Garmin here. And this is all interactable and obviously needs a little bit of time for the AHRS to sort of do its thing and get ready to go. Bit of a whirlwind tour, but I hope that helped show off the cockpit. And the next thing we're going to be doing is going for a quick flight in the aircraft. And if you're unsure of how do I start it up, as with all of our aircraft, we have the checklist systems built in, the autocomplete function works fully, so you can effectively just run through autocomplete, even Control E if you wish, and that doesn't simplify the aircraft, it's just we're connecting all the systems to it, and also if you load on the runway it'll be ready to go. So this is what you should work through to get the aircraft started, or check out the manual that's included. Alright, just before we take off we're going to do a quick engine start so you can actually get a idea of what the aircraft sounds like. These are all taken from the real aircraft, so here we go. I'm going to keep quiet now. You can see the ignition's on, and we're going to be looking for the N1 rising, which it is now. And there we go. Looks like we've got a good start now. So now we would set the aircraft up, ready for taxi, and that's where you're going to join us. Taxiing up onto the runway, ready to go. Alright, so how do we take off the T-33? Well, what we've got to first of all make sure is we've got the flaps set. So flaps set to around 60%, which they are. Then we're going to line up with the runway, come to a stop on the runway, set the brakes, and go up to 100% N1. Now we need to be careful when setting our N1 setting, because it can actually go above it if we're too fast with the thrust lever. So we need to be careful with that. Then release the brakes, off we go. Once we're going down the runway, getting up to around about 80 knots, we're going to start to pull some back pressure on the stick. Now careful, the pitch is very sensitive, that is correct to the real aircraft. And then you will notice that the nose wheel will lift off the ground, so we're kind of doing a wheelie down the runway. That's correct, that's what we want to do. As it's quoted in the manual, that's the minimum drag configuration for takeoff. Then around about 120, maybe 130 knots, just start to add a little bit more back pressure to expect to get airborne around 140 knots, maybe 150, and then we start to climb away, gently climbing away, as this aircraft does have a fair bit of thrust, as we said, but these early jets don't have that much excess thrust for takeoff. So we're pitching up just slightly, then we're going to quickly get the gear to come up, and then what we're going to do is accelerate with a slightly lower nose attitude, get the flaps up, get clean, and then continue on from there. So let's do that. Increasing the N1, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%, up to 100. There we go. Release the brakes. Airspeed is alive. start to pull back on the stick a little bit. Now I'm doing a wheelie. I can feel that there's no weight on the nose wheel. 110, 120, 130 now. A little bit more back pressure. I can feel she wants to fly. There we go, we're in the air. Not too much back pressure. Holding it about there. Okay, gear can come up now. As you can see, the gear indications here. Slightly low. Let's start to get the flaps up as well. Slightly lowering the nose, slightly more, slightly more, slightly more. 22% now, and flaps all the way up. Clean, above 200 knots. So there we go, now we're airborne. Now let me just lower the nose a little bit and we'll start to accelerate. You can see we're already at 250. Now she starts to accelerate, almost getting up to 300 already. So for a jet from the 40s and a trainer, extremely impressive. Alright, we're at 300 knots now after takeoff. We're going to do a little bit of a climb just to show you how nicely this aircraft flies. Just so you can see the stick, you see small inputs give a large roll response, which is what Greg was saying as well, that you have to be careful to not over control the aileron. So let's just pop through this cloud. You can see we're still not losing too much speed as we come through the top here.
The pitch is extremely sensitive, and then the ailerons are also extremely sensitive, and the biggest problem with real pilots is getting into a pilot-induced oscillation on the ailerons, because they put in, you know, it starts going one way, so they pull the stick the other direction, and then they can't stop it.
There we go. So now if I put a large stick input in, you can see the roll rate is really high, but I'm going to release the stick now, and you see how there's a continuation of the roll. Now that is actually partly because we've got some fuel left in the tip tanks. So you can see the tip tanks over this side are obviously going to continue that sort of inertia and momentum throughout the turn. So something to be aware of. And you can see we're still now climbing at 300 knots now. That's fast. You know, for an aircraft from the 40s and a trainer, this was unheard of performance. So what we're going to do now, turn around. I'm going to reduce the N1 down a little bit. And I'm going to turn around to come back to do a low pass by the runway. Now, when we were asking about how they fly the displays, now if you're going to do sort of an aggressive display, normally the engine is left at around 95 to 91% N1, and you'll do all of your maneuvers leaving the engine at that power setting the whole time, because you're going to be gaining and losing energy, but it should work fine overall. So there's the runway ahead of us. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually increase our N1 back up again, and we're going to go over the runway, just losing sight of it now behind this cloud. Right, so here we go with the runway. Look at that, over 400 knots, and we're still building the speed, We're not even at full power, pretty close to, but not quite. So what I'm going to do is hold around about this altitude here, fly by the runway, and we're going to do a loop up, and then we're going to roll over and come back down the runway the other way, just to try to show you the performance this aircraft has. You're going to lose roughly around about 500 feet when you do one of these loops, so that's something to be aware of. And we're expecting to want to enter it at no less than 350 knots. Expecting to get to around about 200 knots at the top of the loop. These are all figures that have been confirmed by the real pilots on the aircraft. So here we go, 3, 2, 1, up, 3.5 G pull, 3 G pull roughly, round that, a bit more. I can tell that's a little bit of an underpull. Keep pulling, keep pulling, keep pulling. 300 knots now, speed still decaying. A little bit less on the stick. Coming around the top, releasing the stick a little bit, round 200 knots, as I said. And now we're going to stop here, release the stick, roll back around the other way, and boom, we're straight back towards the runway. Now we're going to keep the power in, reduce it down a little bit, pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back. Ooh, big pull up with the G's. Boom, hold the speed now. Along the flight line, 440, very, very high speed. What we're going to do is we're going to do a derry turn. So we're going to come in, 270 and back on ourselves. Flying along the runway, imagining it's sort of flight line. So pitching up, pitching up, pitching up. So what we're going to do now is pitch up, pitch up, pitch up, about 30 degrees. Pitching, 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 there we go. Roll all the way round and pull back through ourselves like that. So we've just done a 270-degree turn, pulling back, pulling around 4 or 5G, I would imagine now. Speed still holding. You can hear myself breathing a little heavier there with the G suit, so it must be around 5 or 6G. Coming back off the power slightly, coming back on the power, and boom, there we are. Airport's below us. Those are just some of the maneuvers, and I hope that kind of shows you the precision that you can have, and all of these parameters are tuned, as I said, from someone who's flying this aircraft in the display setting. So you are going to be getting an accurate representation of the aircraft when you're flying around this display. Now, what are some other cool things that you can do at an air show? Well, of course, you want the smoke. So we've simulated that you can actually have different colored smokes that you can select that come out the back of your aircraft. As you can see now, I've got the red smoke selected, but you can select white, blue, and orange. So let's jump back into the cockpit and see how we would select those. Alright, so as you can see, I've got the reds selected. So now I can have white smoke selected, blue smoke selected, and orange smoke selected, or none at all. And that's actually what you would do. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to imagine that we've been flying around for a little bit while and it's become quite dark. So we're going to drop into darkness. Alright, so here you join us now. We've dropped into a little bit of darkness. Now you can kind of see that the aircraft has got this really cool, I would call it retro, but it's not even retro, it's just of its era, colour to the cockpit. So we've got this red colour everywhere. Now why do we have this red lighting? The reason is red lighting actually is better for your night vision. So they wanted it so that pilots weren't having to strain their eyes. It's a little bit debated now if it makes that much of a difference, but that's why you see a lot of military aircraft from this period using this red lighting. Now, we also mentioned earlier about the flares. Now, if you want to drop the flares, you just press the button. It will drop the flares out of the aircraft and it will wait to be reloaded. If you wait and wait and wait, the tooltip will come back and now they're ready again and you can drop some more flares. So we're going to jump back to the daylight and talk about some more features of the aircraft. Alright, so we're back. Let's talk about this trip totalizer that I talked about before. Now it's actually really, really cool. So what you have to do is when you fill up the fuel, you have to set how much fuel you have using this wheel here. Now what will happen is the aircraft knows how much fuel it's burning and just reduces that number down and down and down over time. So if you put the wrong number in there, you will run out of fuel. But that is your how much fuel do I have left. And if you go back to the start of the video, you'll see when I took off it was quite a lot higher because that's how much we burned. Remember, we're saying about the fuel system, we have to manually look after the fuel system. So we've got the tip tanks and we've also got the fuselage tank there on. You should always leave the tip tanks on. That's actually quite an interesting reason behind that. The tip tanks have no fuel pump in them. They used differential pressure from inside to outside to actually pump the fuel from the tips into the engine, and if you don't leave it on at very, very high altitude, you can actually cause some damage to the inside of the tip tanks, even if they're empty. So you always leave those switched on. Now what we're going to do is swap to the modern avionics. Alright, here we are back in the modern avionics. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about the autopilot. So the autopilot has some basic functions: heading, nav, and this is where you would engage them. So you want to follow heading bug, you want to follow your navigation source. Autopilot master is engaged here, and you've got your vertical speed control here. Same with this is where you would toggle it. Alt mode will hold the present altitude, and IAS and VNAV are not modelled, obviously. This is a generic Garmin panel, so it's not specifically built for the T-33, but of course we've made it integrated into that. So that's just how you would engage it and enable it there, and it will show you the different modes up here on top. So this is your sort of FMA at the top there. Now we're descending back towards Victorville, as you can see here, so we're going to come back all the way down to idle, and we're going to kind of line up for a downwind on this side here, and I'm going to swap myself back to the classic avionics just because I kind of like that retro vibe. I think I mentioned it earlier, and I'm going to turn up some of the lights a little bit, so some of the side lights and also some of the back panel lighting there. Alright, here we are on final approach in the T-33. Flaps are all the way down, N1 around about 70%, which is what we need to maintain sort of 3-degree approach path. Just going to add a little bit more power in, just to try and reduce that descent rate and trim back a little bit. Pitch is very sensitive, but that is true to the real aircraft. We have had that confirmed by Greg as well. So it's something you've got to be careful of. And also it mentions in the Pilot Operator's Handbook of porpoising on landing. So you've got to be careful. It's just one smooth progressive flare. Speed around 140, 150 knots on final, to touchdown around about 120, 130. So if you've got your little angle of attack gauge open, so you use the head-up display, something like that, then you're going to want around 6 to 7 degrees angle of attack to about 8 degrees angle of attack for the touchdown. This is looking quite nice now, a little bit more power. We want to remember that this is an enormous runway, and we're a little higher, so we're at 3,000 or 4,000 feet for touchdown, so our true airspeed is a little higher than normal. Coming down, nothing yet. Just start a progressive flare now. Cut the power. Hold it there, and then we're down. Ooh, you saw a little bit of that porpoising that I've talked about. So now I'm just lowering the nose wheel, and now we're down. So now it's one smooth brake application. We have differential braking, and below 100 knots now, we can just bring the aircraft to a stop. While the aircraft's coming to a stop, that's basically the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching this Welcome To video. Of course, included with the aircraft is a large set of liveries, so once you're in the sim you can check those out. There's really quite a lot amount that we've been able to make, including the Ace Maker aircraft, which you've seen today. And we hope that you're able to pick this aircraft up in sim soon and enjoy it. Thank you very much.